District Attorney Mike Schmidt, thank you so much for talking to us. I really appreciate it. As I was saying before we started recording here, I wasn't surprised at all when I heard what you had to say today. And I don't think that anybody who watches the story, our show, should have been surprised either, because we've had you on several times having your opinions on a variety of things, including how to charge the people that we've seen involved in these protests. I didn't really hear much about solutions, though, when it comes to the downtown violence and the violence that we're now seeing in North Portland.
Yeah. Well, I think part of the solution is that we're going to focus our efforts in our research or in our resources. Those are the cases that we're going to take. We're going to work with PPB or the investigative agencies to get the evidence that we need to put those cases together. As you heard from the press conference today, we're talking about a total of somewhere around 550 cases combined. But the vast majority of those are those low-level misdemeanor cases that aren't causing damage, aren't causing harm. Yes, they were told to disperse and they didn't do that, so that is a crime. It's not that it's an unlawful arrest, but we're going to focus our efforts and our resources on the ones that are actually causing the damage and harm. So in some ways, it is a strategy to getting at those crimes and hopefully also a little bit of a de-escalation. We've seen every time that we've ramped up our criminal justice response, the protests expand. I hope this is a little bit of a de-escalation as well.
The chief said recently that we can't arrest our way out of this. Is there, which a lot of people looked at as kind of the easiest or the fastest option, to go in and just arrest everyone? Is there a fast option? What is the timeline for people? How should they begin to process what we're looking at here moving forward?
I applaud the chief. He and I had conversations, and I think he's exactly right. Like I said, every time we increase our show of force, we see that we get a equal and even more increased response. You see what the federal government did when they came in here and how that swelled the number of people in the protests. I don't think there is an easy solution. I don't think there's a fast and easy solution. We've tried arrests, over 550 people now, or at least 550 different cases referred to my office. And that's not worked. So I think the chief's right. We can't arrest our way out of this. We need to start talking and thinking about what are the things that we are going to change in our criminal justice system. And, I think we got to remember, we've been doing this for 76 days, but the issues in our criminal justice system that Black people are talking about, community members, people of color, have been here for decades. And so the idea that we could fix this overnight and get everybody off the streets is probably not realistic.
Do you feel like you have to have two conversations, or are they part of one conversation? The conversation being the big overall broad picture of reform and change moving forward, and tackling what we're seeing kind of on a nightly basis, that now a lot of people in the community in North Portland feel like they are being, again, terrorized by might be an extreme word, but some people would categorize it that way.
It is. It's kind of two issues at the same time. There's the long view systemic reform that needs to happen. A lot of those things I talked about in the campaign, getting rid of cash bail, mandatory sentencing, things that people in the community, in the Black community and others have pointed to for a long time as drivers of disparity. So that's the big conversation, right? Not something we can solve tonight. We can't end those things overnight. We have to do them thoughtfully, and it takes a lot to accomplish that. So then there is the day-to-day of how are we going to handle this. And, I was very pleased and kind of humbled to have members of my transition team who I thought spoke eloquently of the issues that they want to see addressed. And I think that's the only way forward, is that people need to know that we're actually listening and we're working on those things. And it's at all levels of government. It's county where I'm at, it's state, and it's city. And so we all got to get together and come to the table with what are we going to do to improve the system. I think until that conversation really happens, we're going to be seeing these protests go on for a long time.
You mentioned 550 arrests. When we talk about the lesser charges, the ones that you are not going to prosecute, that's the majority of them. So that's like 400. So if it's no longer going to be charged to trespass, interfere with an officer, or run from an officer, what makes you believe that we won't just see more of that on a nightly basis?
Yeah, so, first of all, just for clarity for people who haven't read the policy, it's pursuant only to these protests. My policy doesn't extend to those types of crimes in any situation, in our community. So, but in the context of these protests, like I said, what we've seen every time we're making those arrests, Dan, you're a news guy. I'm on Twitter. People tweet me videos every single night. And I see these arrests happening. And what I see is when somebody is in the middle of the street talking to officers, and is saying, I'm not cursing at you. I want you to hear me. And they're ordered, get out of the street, and they don't do that. And then what ends up happening is that escalates to an arrest. It just seems that exacerbates the situation we're in. So, I mean, those are the cases that we're looking at. If somebody's throwing rocks at officers, if somebody's lighting things on fire, we're going to prosecute those cases. But these cases where really the conduct is somebody, trying to communicate and say what they're concerned about, and then they end up getting arrested for disobeying a lawful order, that doesn't further public safety to spend the resources to prosecute those cases.
So you have the 150 cases that are ones that you're pursuing, and these are the more serious ones. These are arson, these are assault, things of that nature. But if you're still pursuing those crimes, when you see somebody trying to light a building on fire, but you're not pursuing the people who are standing alongside of them, in some cases cheering them on, explain to people how that won't empower or embolden some of the people who are willing to commit those more egregious acts.
Well, really, Dan, it's about our criminal justice system, about how our criminal laws work. If you are in the crowd and somebody else in the crowd is lighting things on fire, but you're there holding your sign that says Black Lives Matter, why should you be liable for getting prosecuted and arrested because somebody else is doing that? We've had protest members who have gone out and put out fires and who have confronted other people in these protests. But then once the order is given to disperse and the police are starting to move in and make arrests, you don't know who you're arresting, if you're arresting the person that was trying to put out the fire or not. So, I mean, the point is, let's look at the conduct and let's prosecute people who are doing damage. And that's where I think our resources should be put. Not a broad net, a wide net sweeping in people who are there to be heard, and also sometimes cheering people on, but sometimes like not, and trying to do the right thing, but wanting to have their voices heard.
There was a case recently, we saw a 77-year-old woman intervene in a protest and acted as a counter-protester. And she had paint dumped on her head and caution tape thrown on top of her. Under the new rules, would the people who did that have been charged with a crime?
Yes. Yeah, that's not acceptable. It's not acceptable to, what we're talking about is interfering with a peace officer, disorderly conduct, those types of charges where it's basically an officer says, hey, it's time for you to go home, and you don't. Or you need to get out of the street, and you don't. Those are lawful orders that the police officer can give. It is a crime. But this policy is saying we're not going to focus our resources there. If you are assaulting other people in the crowd, if you are dumping paint on their heads, if you are lighting things on fire, you're throwing rocks at people, those are the cases that we're going to prosecute. We're going to, like we would do for any prosecution, we get the evidence, we get witness statements, we get video evidence, and we'll put together a case.
We have seen crowds at this point going to some people's homes. There was a video I saw recently of an altercation starting on a woman's porch. She was wearing Nazi insignia, a swastika on her arm, and it was getting very close to violence. There was a video of a pickup truck driving through a crowd of people on a street and people jumping out of the way. There are investigations now of people having pipe bombs exploding near them while they're protesting. Are you concerned at all with a kind of by taking police power away in some of these situations, that it opens the door for other types of violence to enter these situations?
So first, nothing in this policy takes away police power. They can still make the arrests. They're lawful arrests. They are allowed to make them. What we're saying is that on certain types of cases where there's not violence, so not the crimes that you were just talking about. We're not talking about pipe bombs, not talking about, those kinds of things. For certain nonviolent arrest cases, we're going to choose not to use the resources of this office to prosecute those. So then your question is, by not doing that, would that nonviolent protester suddenly turn into a violent protester because they didn't get prosecuted the first time? I don't think.
I'm wondering, was there any? I haven't done any research, so I don't know if charges will never stick. Are police less likely to make arrests? Are they less likely to put themselves into the crowd to try and make an arrest or to control a situation or to handcuff someone if they know the charges most likely won't stick? And if their lack of, aggression there, which is one of the issues we're talking about, balancing to begin with, if that lack will be met elsewhere, as we see things begin to escalate with some counter protesters, whether it be an old woman who is standing in front of a crowd and shouting them down, or something entirely different, which would be something violent, like a truck driving through, or something worse, a bomb going off.
Yeah, it doesn't take away a police officer's authority. We say in the policy that nothing in this policy takes away a police officer's authority to make an arrest. If they feel like they need to do that for crowd control purposes, then I suppose that is up to them. That's their decision how they're going to do it. But we want them to focus, in the cases that we want to prosecute are the cases where people are doing harm. They're hurting other people. They are destroying property. Those are the cases that we are going to take and prosecute. And so that's what we'll be looking for from PVB.
One of the observations that the news media has been making for a very long time, and that I made when I went down to cover these demonstrations and protests and what turned into violent activity late in the night, was the differential between the people who are protesting and the people who are engaging in criminal activity. And of course, you're hoping to make that, I assume, draw that line as well when it comes to people being arrested and where the police should be focusing their attention. But there is obviously that concern that the narrative that there aren't going to be people charged for breaking actual rules and breaking the law, even though those are misdemeanor crimes, that will empower that small group of people that makes headlines every night for doing the terrible things like trying to set buildings on fire or assaulting 77-year-old women.
Yeah, those are the cases we're going to prosecute. The people that are bent on doing the terrible things, those are exactly the cases that we are going to prosecute. And I was very clear in the conference today that if you're injuring other people, if you are injuring police officers, you can expect to be prosecuted. If you're there to damage property, you can expect to be prosecuted. So that's where we're going to focus our attention. I think that actually is a strategy that hopefully can stop and intercept that type of behavior, as opposed to the cases where it's the person who's caught in between the person who's bent on creating harm and the police officer.
But I think it was always assumed by everyone that those people would be prosecuted, correct? Like we never assumed that somebody lighting a fire or assaulting somebody wouldn't be prosecuted. They're taking these risks already knowing the rules. But now we're taking away some of the punishment for people with lesser crimes. And again, the concern is that will empower people who are willing to break the law or take it to that next step beyond a peaceful protest.
Looking at the people who are being charged with these misdemeanor crimes, the disorderly conduct, the trespass, the interference with a peace officer for not following the order, these are not career criminals. These are our neighbors. They are not people with criminal records by and large. They are not people who are going to go on to a life of crime after not being prosecuted for holding up their Black Lives Matter sign and getting stuck in the melee. So I'm not concerned that those are the people who are going to suddenly be emboldened to take the next step and start doing harm. Like you say, we are always going to go after the people who are creating harm. This just makes it clear that we are absolutely going to continue to focus and put all of our attention on those people.
Is there a way to track some people who are being arrested but not charged for lesser crimes to know if they are in fact returning night after night to commit lesser offenses, but maybe empower some people who are taking bolder, more violent steps?
Yeah, so I mean, if you are arrested, there's a record created of that. And if we see that, where we see the same person night after night continues to get arrested, the policy doesn't say that we will never charge somebody. It says the presumption is that we are not going to charge people for these crimes. But where there are extenuating circumstances, where there is something that makes it rise to a higher level, we're absolutely still going to file some of those charges. So it's not that of the 400 misdemeanors, you will see zero, charges. That's not the case. There will absolutely be some misdemeanor cases that we are prosecuting, but we're going to be very discerning about that. The presumption is that we won't, but we can track, as you suggest. If we see people over and over and over doing the same things or stepping up their conduct, that would absolutely fit into the policy of something we can prosecute.
You also stated, and it's interesting that sometimes this doesn't even get brought up into the conversation until this late in it, but we are in the midst of a pandemic, and COVID does have a big impact in the decision making that everybody makes, public, private. If we were not in a pandemic right now, would your rules of leniency be a little bit different, or is that not part of your decision making?
It is. It factors into the decision making. And I think you bring up a good point, Dan. This is something that I think a lot of people don't understand, is that even if I elected to prosecute every one of these misdemeanor cases, at best, we're talking about those cases coming into our court system probably 9 months to a year from now. There's a huge backlog of cases, and especially for cases that are misdemeanors and out of custody, which all of these are by definition in our policy. These are not cases that are going to get their time in court for a long time from now. So we could, if we prosecuted those cases, took them to court, a year from now, they would actually be coming to fruition where we would be getting to the point of trying these cases. I think a lot of them would be trials. So, that would be a huge expense, a resource expenditure for my office. And ultimately, at the end of the day, what the sentence for one of these types of charges would typically look like would probably involve maybe a fine and some small amount of community service for a year from now and all of the resources we could put into them. When I'm looking at the resources of this office and how to invest in things that are going to have the biggest bang for public safety, that's why we're focusing on the crimes where people are committing violence.
As we look down the line, if things do not change and we continue to see the same level of violence or these spikes of more violence that we're starting to see, or new types when it comes to maybe counter protesters getting involved or engaged with some of these protesters in the violence, what's next in the plan to tamp this out?
Like I said at the outset, I don't think this is going away until we have a broader conversation about what are the changes we're going to make in our criminal justice system. I agree with the chief. We can't arrest our way out of this issue. The show of force it only swells the ranks of people who are in the protest. So I hope that we can have conversations and start to get at some of the issues. I ran on a lot of those issues. I have made them a part of my agenda and things that I'm going to work on from the district attorney's office. I would happily join police agencies doing the same thing. However, I can be helpful in that conversation. But, if this continues and goes on for an extended period of time, we're just going to have to figure out, what are the things that we can do to show that we are listening to the community. So maybe we can, stop and get back to the life without the protests.
But I guess we don't really know what that answer is exactly, because we have seen changes. You being elected is a change to begin with. You ran on a very progressive platform, and you got picked for the job. We've seen $15 million cut from the police budget. We have seen changes on a state level. There was a special session called, and demands were met for some of the high priority items that were named in the Black Lives Matter movement. There was a lot of uproar when the federal government moved in and started defending the federal building and firing tear gas at the crowd. The feds have pulled back. And while we see momentary dips in violence from the violent actors in the protest crowd, it hasn't gone away. It continues to stick around. Are we looking at what could be years of this, or is it a game of attrition with the protesters who are out there lighting fires to just see when they're going to stop? Because I'm not sure I've been able to hear a finish line for anyone.
I don't know that anybody knows what the finish line exactly looks like. I know the things that we have to work on, and I had members from the community up there with me today to talk about the things that they hope that they see that we work on. But these issues weren't created overnight. They're not going to be fixed overnight. I think we have a lot of work to do. And my hope is if the community sees that we are really working on them, we're taking them seriously, then the community is going to start to support that the people who are committing violence every night are actually detracting and taking away from the message that we should be focused on. But I haven't yet seen that level of support of people in the community being assured or feeling like we are appropriately or completely taking on and listening to their concerns. So I think until that happens, there's going to continue to be protests. There's going to be support.
Now, I noticed today that everybody stuck to the message, and that was kind of the first time right there at the end of this interview that I've heard you say that the people who are committing the violent acts are taking away from the message of the overall movement. And I didn't hear from any of the people who were in your on your team today when they spoke either. Is there a reason that isn't a little higher up in the talking points?
Well, I mean, I think I've been very clear that my focus is going to be that the violence is not acceptable, and those are the cases we're going to prosecute. And, you know, when we continue to have the protests going on night after night, and that's what's getting all the attention in the media, that's what everybody wants to talk about, it's necessarily taking away from the conversation that I think we all hope that we should be having to get these things done. So it may not have been stated as directly as what I just said, but I think implicit in what I'm saying is let's focus on stopping that violent crime and get to having the conversation and dialogue that we want to be having.
District Attorney Mike Schmidt, thank you so much. You just gave me, 20 minutes of your time, and I don't think you have any of that to give nowadays. So I appreciate your hard work. Yeah, really. Thank you so much for talking to us and our viewers.
Thanks, Dan.